All right, what up, Who That Nation? This is No Cap, No Filter Saints. I'm your host, Marley G, and I have a special guest today joining me, man. Chris Rosvoglou, man. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man. I appreciate you coming onto the platform, man. I really appreciate this, man. How your holidays was, first and foremost.
They were good, honestly. No real complaints. Now that I thought about it, obviously other reasons, football related, get stressful and whatnot. But it's always fun, kind of sitting down with family, watching games that don't involve your team, so you're not like emotionally invested.
Yeah,
But yeah, it was a good time. I hope yours were great as well.
yeah. I had a nice holidays. I would like to say I had a nice holidays, actually. Um, so let's go ahead on and get into it, man. Where you from, and like, what made you such a passionate Saints fan that you are today?
Yeah, so I'm actually, I was born in New York, and growing up, especially like in my younger age, I was really just super into the Yankees. Derek Jeter was like my favorite athlete ever growing up as a kid. And it wasn't really until '06 when I started getting into football. And I tell people all the time, like, for me, through like the first 10, 12 years of my life, it was always just baseball, baseball, baseball. Well, then once I started watching in '06 and I got to start paying attention to the Saints and seeing how, and of course, obviously, at the time I wasn't old enough to really understand the reason why the camaraderie and the way the city rallied around that team was until I got older and understood the magnitude, obviously, of Hurricane Katrina and everything that happened. But at the time, I was like, wow, this is just like the most passionate fan base I've ever seen. The story behind Drew going there and having a new coach, it just felt like something exciting. So younger me kind of hopped on the bandwagon in '06. And then from there on out, every single year just kept getting, my love for the team kept growing. And then it got to the point where I believe it was around 2015 or 2016. I was like, man, I really want to start a podcast and start talking about this team, because obviously your feelings of the franchise changed a little bit from, you still love them, but now you want to get into more of an analytical / commentary role about it. So that's where it kind of shifted. But yeah, around '06 is when I really started getting committed to this team and enjoying it. I vividly remember watching that '06 game on ESPN that Monday night with the Falcon Saints game. I remember being with my dad and kind of seeing how that unfolded. And that's where it kind of all kind of transpired from. And I wouldn't change a thing. Maybe I would have liked them a little bit earlier. If anything, it wouldn't have been as baseball centric in my early years, but kind of latching onto this team, definitely something that I don't regret one bit.
Hmm. That's amazing that you have so much knowledge about the game and you started learning about it in '06. That's amazing. There's people been fans since the '80s and '90s, and they just casual fans, but they're real passionate, but they don't know as much about the game as you do. But um, was there like a certain moment that made you gravitate towards specifically the Saints, being from New York, though?
I think honestly, it was just, there's two things for me. I think always growing up, I don't know why I love the story of underdogs. And when I'm sitting there just listening to the broadcast and they're talking about what the city went through, and they're talking about what a guy like Drew Brees went through, which prior to '06, as a sports fan, because I was not a football fan, I had zero knowledge of Drew Brees. It wasn't literally until that season when I'm listening to Mike Tirico talking about it, I'm like, wow, this is fascinating. I'm sitting there watching ESPN specials of them working on his shoulder. I'm like, man, I love hearing about this guy's story. So I start watching him more. Obviously, Reggie Bush was one of the first football players that you kind of just see him move and you're like, okay, this guy is different. So he became someone that I wanted. I remember one of my birthdays, I asked my parents, I need to have a Reggie Bush jersey. Like, that's the gift that I needed, because I just wanted 25 on my back and being able to have that. So I think it was a mix of, you see how energetic the crowd was on that specific night and go, wow, is it like this every single game that they have at home? Because I'd love to be a part of it. And then it's kind of the players too that you see in there. And then, I mentioned Breeze, I mentioned Bush. As the years started going by, then Colston started becoming my favorite. And it just kind of shifted there. But it was between the city and the players alone that really kind of pulled me in. And now I understand it more than ever how important, obviously, the team is to the city and vice versa. But it definitely, I would say, the players growing up early on.
And you've been in New York all this time.
Yeah, New York's been has been my place. I absolutely love it. Obviously, I still make my yearly trips to go watch this team, and I think for me, it's why I kind of tell people all the time. They always go, "Chris, you're so critical. How do you get away with being critical and not have to deal with anyone yelling at you?" I'm like, I think it would change. If I was in New Orleans, I'd probably feel bad ripping the coaches the way I do, or this and that. But because I'm down here, because I'm over here, I think I feel a little bit like I have an easier time getting away with it, almost, in a sense. But yeah, I'm still here. But man, I'll tell you what, the time that I do spend down there, it's always my favorite weekend of the year, like every single time.
Hmm. That's fascinating, man. I always thought you was in New Orleans this whole time, but you had the pod. You started it. It's very successful. I listen to it all the time at work, man. You just help me get by through my day, especially when I'm mad at the Saints. I listen to you, and you kind of like you venting. I hear you vent, and it's like, man, this dude. I'm agreeing with everything he's saying, and it just gets me through my day. Through the pod, like, what's been some of your most proud accomplishments so far? So far,
I would say the one for me that sticks out is the fact that when a game finishes for the Saints, 5 minutes after, 10 minutes after, I usually will go live on Buku Media's YouTube page. And I think the ability to kind of see that there's people waiting in there, there's people already putting their comments and their thoughts on the game or their questions in the chat. I think it's that ability to have, depending on how the game goes, like I've noticed this year was very odd. When the Saints were losing games, there were far more people ready to watch than when they were winning. Now, maybe that could be my own doing by kind of shifting towards the negative more than the positive this season. But I think having people that want to actually listen and want to give their thoughts every single Sunday and making sure there's that continuity there of, all right, I see this person's YouTube name coming up and I see that person's YouTube name coming up. Like I could rattle off just 10 to 15 people, off the top of my head that every Sunday I remember seeing them in there just leaving their comments. I think having that is the thing that I'm most proud of. Obviously, I'd say I'm also proud of just keeping, the streak alive of every year kind of doing that. I've been doing this since I believe 2016 or 2015. I don't remember which year I started it, but it was one of those. So being able to have this now for 7-8 years has been something that I've been really proud of to kind of keep this going. But I would say having people like a little community when it comes to those live streams, that's something that I'm probably really proud of because it's fun to kind of get the pulse of how they feel. Obviously I'm going to express how I feel, but I love seeing how Saints fans feel and getting a good read on it.
I think the influx come when we lose a game. It just comes from frustration, and people just want to channel their thoughts through you and through your channel and get their comments heard. So it's kind of like, it's kind of like a little funnel for people to just get their frustration out. That's what I think that comes from. And when we win, people are just too busy celebrating. That's what I think it comes from. But you do talk about on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it. You talk about the negative narrative that you got on your back right now about just complaining about the team. Man, I think a lot of people are just frustrated with the team. I don't just think it's just you. I know me. I complain a lot. You said you had the DA hate award. I think I got you beat. I've been hashtagging Fire Dennis Allen for a long time. Back since last year. Like I can't stand the dude. I despise him.
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned that. You might have me be honestly. There's still I keep telling people too when I put it up and someone's like, "Oh, Chris, you're the biggest hater." I'm like, funny enough, like I think the one thing I like about my Twitter account is I follow a real good amount of Saints fans that I'm like, it's not like others. Like I'm not trying to like pinpoint out people and call them out because it's their prerogative to do whatever they want. But I know for some reporters, and that's not what I consider myself. I consider myself a fan, really. They're not going to, let's say, follow back fans. So they won't really see what they say unless it's in the comments. And that's totally okay. It's probably better, honestly, for their mental health that way. But I see what a lot of people post. So I know I'm definitely not at the top of the list. Maybe among podcasters, I might be in like the top 3 of being critical. But I would say you mentioned the Dennis Allen thing. Today, I was just scrolling through stuff because one of my goals this year, I want to do more stuff on TikTok just to have short form videos for people. And I'm like, let me see what I posted last year because I wasn't that active last year on the app. And I'm like, I'm going back and it's in mid-December, a video of me just saying like the Saints have to fire DA. And I'm like, let me give it a listen. And I promise you, nothing's really changed from that rant to now. It's kind of just been like the same complaints over and over again, which to your point, like you're saying, you mentioned wanting him out from last year. It just lets that frustration just boil over. And at some point, I think even the most calm people are going to reach their breaking point and be like, you know what? We're going to go to that side. The people are yelling, they got to fire him. It's a frustrating situation. I think it's also been oddly, I don't want to say a fun situation, but there's oddly been factions that have formed on Saints Twitter, in social media that you're like, okay, there's that group, there's this group. And that part of it is actually entertaining. But the product itself, I would say, has become very frustrating. And I'm sure you've heard me say it before, but like, I'm very tired of like so many Sundays during the season for the last 2 years where one of my topics has been, all right, it's time to fire DA. And I'm sure I'm going to do it again next year. And it's not me doing it out of spite. It's just what I want for this football team because I'd like them to have greater expectations and standards.
Yeah, man. Like I say, man, I despise that, man. I get sick to my stomach every thumbnail I see of him, or every time it's an article come out and they use a picture of him, I just get sick to my stomach. Mickey Loomis, he put a shutdown to the whole Billboard of Fire Dennis Allen thing that people been coming up with. And if they did that, hopefully we could get like a Fire Dennis Allen theme float for Mardi Gras, because Mardi Gras is right around the corner. I'm pretty sure if they did a Zion float, they're gonna do a Dennis Allen float this year. But what's your goals for 2024 with the pod?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, and I don't know what that time slot will be yet, is trying to find, especially during the offseason, because I know during the season, you kind of find, that soft spot of, I'll do a post-game live stream. I'll do one on Monday morning to kind of recap anything I may have missed or anything that trickles down overnight, because one of the downsides to posting going live right after the game is I kind of miss the press conferences. So maybe there's a time where Dennis Allen says something incredibly stupid, like this past Sunday where he throws the team under the bus, and I say, okay, now I'm going to cover that on Monday's show. So I've kind of had that comfortability, but now when you go into the offseason, and for the Saints, unfortunately, the offseason has started way too early the last 3 years, you kind of try to find where's that spot where a lot of Saints fans will have time in their day to kind of unify. And I'm going to try and figure out what that is. That's definitely one aspect. I know, obviously, if there's breaking news, you could always do a live stream, and there's going to be people that kind of funnel in because they're all going to be searching frantically to find someone talking about it. But I definitely want to find a day and a time that is perfect for the Who Dat Nation, that everyone could kind of relax, chat, and it'll be the same type of idea where I'll have those comments, ready for people, and if they put anything, it'll come up. But that'd be one of my goals. Another goal, kind of what I alluded to before, trying to just get more short content out there. It could even be a snippet of a full podcast I did, but I think, I've been able to kind of interact with people on Twitter, definitely been interacting with people on YouTube. I definitely think there's like an untapped, market in terms of TikTok, of having people that maybe are maybe a younger demographic, maybe, in that 15 to 25 to 30 range of like, they're just only absorbing that short-term content. And if I could reel them in a little bit and get them interested to say, okay, maybe I want to see more long-form content as well, maybe that could get them to go one way. Those are some things. Obviously, there's more that I'm going to tackle about. I think getting, some players on this offseason is going to be paramount. I've done it before, but I think this offseason is going to be more important because I want to know, like, what was it like in the locker room? I know there's some reporters that have done a great job of shedding light on the information, but I'd love to get a little bit more and pull that information out of players, whether it's Eric McCoy, who I've had on before, Shaheed. So hopefully they'll be willing to come on and chat about that. But those are definitely some things off the top of my head. And I'm sure as January progresses, there'll be more that come to mind.
Yeah, I thought you was going to mention that as one of your biggest accomplishments, having the players on the pod.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that I absolutely love. I think the next step, which would make it even cooler if I could, and I'd be more proud of, if it's like a find a way to do that while also having the ability for fans to kind of put their questions in, and then I could pull it up for the player to read. I haven't done that before. That would definitely be something that I'd like to do for the fans, so they can kind of have an interactive Q&A. And if I could do that, then I'll definitely be proud of it. Obviously, I'm very honored and thankful for the time that they give me regardless. But in terms of like personal achievement, if I could do that, I'd probably be a little bit more happy than what I've been doing in the past.
Yeah, man. Like I say, man, I follow the pod very closely. I noticed that you're a big movie buff. Any ideas on doing like a YouTube just specifically for reviewing movies?
Yeah, that's something that's definitely something I want to do. I just literally today started like a TikTok account for it, and I don't know if that's going to go anywhere. It could very well just be an absolute dud, and if so, that is what it is. But I think for now, what I'd like to do is kind of just do short videos like that, see if there's any interest, whether it's people on that app, whether it's people on Twitter, whatever. And if so, maybe do longer form videos. But I really do like the idea of, that 1 to 3 minute range that TikTok offers, because I think for some people, you kind of want to know as soon as possible, did someone see a movie that is worth checking out? Is it not worth checking out? What are some fun suggestions? I know everyone lives in this world of streaming now, and there's so many movies that get thrown on different platforms. So I watch a ton of movies. I probably want to watch an unhealthy amount of movies. So
what's your top three?
So my top three all time, it always varies. I know Good Will Hunting's always kind of like flirting in my top three just because it's in the more rewatchable section for me. Obviously, I kind of bounce back with certain movies. I love In Bruges from Martin McDonagh. That's like a movie that I've absolutely adored in my life. Obviously, I love Dark Knight, but I feel like it's so kind of, I don't want to say like cliche, but everyone loves it and it's almost become mainstream that I don't put it in my top three. But I'd say one that I've watched recently, like in the last year and a half, that I loved. I loved Sound of Metal. That was something that was pretty cool. I watched that on Prime Video, I think, and that one was one that really stuck with me. So that's definitely been one, too. And then even this year, like this past year, obviously I loved Oppenheimer, loved Holdovers, loved Across the Spider-Verse. So there's definitely a lot. And I probably watched close to like 200 movies last year. I probably have to check my letterbox to see what the disgusting amount was. That's definitely something that I'll also get around to as well. It's just, especially with this offseason, I think there's going to be a lot of negative Saints stuff. So I think to have a movie related platform where I can have a little bit more positivity for myself, they'll probably balance out the books a little bit.
But damn, with over 200 movies, damn, you could definitely be a critic. But I think it's time to go ahead on and talk about this sorry ass team that we both love, man. Let's go ahead on and just address the elephant in the room. You know, the victory formation. Everybody already heard your stance on it. What you think the punishments will be?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. The way I think of it is this. I think that we've reached the point right now it's kind of being overblown. Like I saw some people going, the Falcons will never forget this. NFL teams will never forget this. And I'm like, I promise you by next week they're going to forget it because it's just the nature of the NFL. Like the playoffs are coming around this weekend. Crazy things are going to happen then, and people are going to talk about that. And no one's going to care about what happened. What I will say, though, in terms of like punishment, I think that was definitely the last time we'll see Jameis Winston in a Saints uniform. I'm not saying that's the right thing for the Saints to do. I'm not saying that's the wrong thing for them to do. I just think that's what they're going to do because I don't think Dennis Allen really wants to go down that road again. I think that obviously there's been friction between the two of them as dating back to last year with the back injury and feeling like he would have had his job back once he was healthy, and then he never ended up getting his job back. And obviously I don't want to say there's animosity there, but I'd say there's tension there. So that would be one thing. I think for, Mickey Loomis to speak to the players this past Monday for 30 minutes or so and kind of talk to them and get across the message where it's either you're all in or you're not. And if you're not, then you probably have to go. I think that's something that I'm fascinated to see how that plays out this offseason because I don't think we're in a situation where it's just one or two guys that aren't exactly listening to Dennis Allen's message or not exactly jiving with the head coach. I think there's probably a multitude of guys. And I think you see it on social media. I saw it. You saw it. How many guys defended Jameis Winston this past Monday? It was about 10, 12, and they're all notable players. It's Alvin, it's Juwan Johnson, it's Cam Jordan, it's Tyrann Mathieu, it's Chris Olave. It's not your lesser-known guys, So I think it's interesting to see. This could be the turning point where I think the Saints can either go into the 2024 season and they're just a dead team walking because there's already friction, or they'll learn from that, they'll grow from that, and end up being better for it. I don't really lean that way because I think it's tough to imagine that, beating the Falcons and your coach throwing you under the bus is that galvanizing moment for the team. But I do think there's going to be changes, and I do think it's going to be something that lingers within the Saints team because Dennis Allen flat out admit that he told them one thing, they did the complete opposite. But I don't think it's going to affect the rest of the league, and I don't think the NFL has any problem with it. I think they'll get over it relatively quickly. But I do think Jameis Winston will be gone, and that'll probably be the first step to the Saints making moves this offseason to kind of fix the culture that I don't really think needs fixing, but obviously they got to blame it on something.
Yeah. Ain't it crazy that DA and Jameis both have this history versus Atlanta? Like last year, it was the fourth quarter comeback, most in Saints history. And then this year was the infamous knee audible that been talked about everywhere right after the Cat Williams fiasco. It's just crazy. But I'm going to miss Jameis. Even if he wouldn't have did that, I think Jameis probably would have been gone. But right before that happened, I think he did a restructure. So who knows? But it's just going to be it's going to be – I'm going to miss Jameis. I thought that we didn't really just need Carr like that. We could have just rolled with Jameis. But I hope he have some type of Geno revival to his career. But you mentioned the players. One of the cornerstone players of this team is Cam Jordan. He said what he said in the interview. A lot of these players just been dropping little nuggets for us, basically telling us without telling us and putting in so many words. But he basically talked about the leadership and he talked about the players. He was like, well, if players could leave, then leadership could change or something like along those lines. Then he backpedaled on Twitter and was like, "Oh, what I was talking about leaders amongst the players." No, you didn't. No, you didn't. You distinguishedly separated the two and differentiated the two. Then you backpedal. A lot of these players came to Jameis Winston defense, but you don't see nobody coming to Dennis Allen defense and just say, "Man, I see all the stuff that's talked about Dennis Allen, and Dennis Allen is this, Dennis Allen is that. He's a great guy. He's a great coach. He's a good leader." You don't see nobody.
Yeah, and I think with the Cam Jordan thing, what stood out to me, I know he obviously walked back his comments because he's doing what he thinks is right, and obviously he doesn't want to have any negative publicity after what happened on Sunday. And I understand that. I think it is to a certain degree admirable, but I think a lot of us Saints fans are smart enough to understand what was being said and what was not said and what he was close to saying, because if you go back and listen to it, he pretty much said Dennis Allen's still the head coach and then went to say until and caught himself after he said until, and then kind of went back to saying like his usual coach speech and politically correct things with Cam Jordan's usually good at. But I think that when Cam Jordan almost slips up, I think that's it. Like, I think if you don't have Cam's trust, if you don't have Cam's 100% commitment, then I don't know where you go. Like, this is one of the leaders of the team. I think the three guys that I look at for leadership in New Orleans, it's Cam, it's DeMario, it's Tyrann Mathieu. When Cam is almost slipping up and kind of saying, well, if leadership can change and Dennis Allen's the head coach until he's not, and that's pretty much what he was about to say before he caught himself, I think it is interesting. And I think it's something that makes this situation so much more frustrating, because it's one thing for, Jameis Winston, who may feel slighted to do something, right? And then maybe not agree with Dennis Allen. But when Cam almost slips up, when Alvin clearly is frustrated, when in my opinion, your most talented player in Marshawn Lattimore is not playing right now and seems to be on the way out, why are these not red flags? Like that's what makes this situation so incredibly aggravating, is that all the warning signs are there. Dennis Allen's former employers, his former coworkers are telling you nothing's changed about this guy. It's the same situation. It sounds exactly the same. And the Saints aren't making any changes. It really, really is frustrating, because I think no matter what Cam may try to backpedal, whatever comments that, Mickey Loomis may try to diminish and say that, oh, that's silly, or that didn't happen, or he didn't lose the locker room. Are we sure? Like, you can try to say that, and you could try to do all the PR damage that you need. But at the end of the day, I think the Who Dat Nation is incredibly smart. They may be incredibly witty. It could be annoying. I know I can be annoying, but we're smart fans. And I think we see what's between the lines, because it's not hard to read what's going on between the lines. And I think Cam's is just a slight hint of what's to come. And I'll go as far to say this, and I don't know when it's going to happen. When the day inevitably comes that Dennis Allen is fired, and I'd imagine it's after the 2024 season, I think there'll be a ton of information that comes out. And a lot of people and a lot of fans are going to go, I told you so. Like that's what we figured, and there it is. So it's going to be interesting. And I do think Cam Jordan's comments, walk him back, but we know what was there, and I don't blame him for feeling the way he did.
Yeah, man, that was very telling to me. Cam Jordan, he's a seasoned veteran. He knows how to speak when it comes to the media. He knows what to say and what not to say. But I don't think it was a slip up. It was intentional. And then he just, somebody told him from his team or PR or whatever to go back and, backtrack and just make things right. But when it comes to Mickey Loomis, he sees all these things. He's not blind to all this. And he had a 30-minute meeting with all the players. And then he's talking about, oh, Dennis Allen hasn't lost the locker room. That sounds like a very big contradiction to me. But like you say, former co-workers like Amy Trask, what you thought about her comments on the podcast?
Yeah, I think her comments, I think it just kind of reiterates everything she said. And the ones that scare me are that if you go back to years ago, like this is a long time ago, way before Dennis Allen was ever even in consideration for the head coach of the Saints, she kind of talked about how when Dennis Allen was there, the narratives and the goalposts started shifting. Like everything started changing. Like they were an 8-8 team before he got there. And when he got there, it was all about, we got to win. And then they couldn't really win. They were 4-12. They were 4-12. And the narratives start changing. It's about this. This is the problem. That's the problem. A lot of deflection. And then for her to come out yesterday and kind of piggyback off her old points while also mentioning that his leadership skills were poor. His kind of personable ability was poor. And I think that's the thing that's bad about Dennis Allen. we criticize Dennis Allen for a lot of things. The one thing I'll give him credit for is I think when it comes to X's and O's, he's actually a good coach. I think that's why he makes really good second half adjustments. But if you're not personable, if you can't relate with your players, if they feel like, man, I just don't really mess with you, I think that's something that's just hard to overcome in the NFL. Like, you got to be able to match your players' energies. He never does that. I never see him match his players' energy one bit. And this is a team and a city that energy, it's always on an 11 out of 10, and he's never on that matching it. So I think when she makes those comments, I think it kind of shows that, look, maybe some people do change. Dennis Allen hasn't changed. Excellent defensive coordinator, no doubt about it. But he wasn't fit to be a head coach back then. He's not fit to be a head coach right now. And I think it just goes to show that New Orleans has kind of lost their way in terms of what they strive to be. Because under Sean Payton, I know there was those 3, 7, and 9 years. I know it. And there was frustration. I remember there was rumors about Sean Payton getting traded to the 49ers, rumors about him just getting fired outright. Like, I know it was bad at times. But for the majority of the Sean Payton tenure, it was good. And he earned that kind of long leash with the NFC Championship game appearance in 06 and obviously the Super Bowl in 09. What has Dennis Allen earned? Like, his best year was now at 9-8 with a horrible schedule, with them spending $150 million on their quarterback. If you couldn't do it then, when is it going to happen? I don't know. So when I hear Amy Trask kind of talk about it, I think that it just shows how much he hasn't changed, and also shows how screwed Saints fans are right now as long as this guy's the head coach. And it's a depressing thing to say, but I think it's the truth and how we feel.
Do you think his job security has something to do with his mystery contract?
No, I think for the Saints, I forgot who reported it, but for whoever said that they view themselves as the Steelers, I think the Saints don't want to be a franchise that people look at and go, oh, they got no patience. They want to give coaches at least 3 years, and that's that. Because I think for the Saints, I don't think it has to do with the contract. And the reason I feel that way is if the Saints were about kind of saving money, then they would not be kicking the can down the road and spending as much as they did, because those two things kind of would go, against each other. If they were worried about Dennis Allen, how much they pay him, then why pay Derek Carr as much? Why restructure these contracts that you do? Why potentially trade Marshawn Lattimore this offseason where, yeah, sure, it's $11 million cheaper now because of the option bonus, but it's still expensive to get rid of him. So I don't see it as much as the contract. I think it's them trying to lay down this image that we value continuity. We value patience and stability and things of that nature. But I think, continuity and stability, it's only warranted if you're getting the right results. And if you're not, then stability really quickly becomes stupidity. And that's what it's been for the Saints. But I think it's more so that than it is, money reasons. I don't think it's financial at all.
When it comes to players departing, a lot of people are talking about Sean. A lot of people already feel like Mike already pretty much out the door. Is there anybody that you think that people are not talking about enough that may be gone?
Yeah, no, look, I think he's been talked about by fans slightly, but I'm very fascinated to see what they do with Alvin. I'm not saying they're going to get rid of Alvin. I'm just fascinated to see what they do, though, because DA's already hinted he doesn't think Alvin's the back that he used to be. And look, I don't think Alvin is the back that he used to be, but I don't think Alvin's some washed-up running back at all. I think he's still a very good playmaker. I think he's grossly misused in the passing game. When you just start using him for dump-offs, I think you're losing the point here. It's got to be angle routes. It's got to be wheel routes. It's got to be option routes. Anything where he can kind of get in space one-on-one with the linebacker and kind of really take advantage of that mismatch. So, yeah, look, Michael Thomas we've heard a lot about. Lattimore we've heard a lot about. Winston we've heard a lot about. We've heard about Ramczyk. Does he retire with that bad knee injury? That's possible. I'm curious to see what happens with Alvin. And I'm not saying the Saints are going to get rid of him, but I know Alvin's been outspoken about how he feels about this team. I know DA has not felt bad about kind of going against what Alvin said. Alvin said we have no identity on offense. DA, the very next day, I think we have an identity. I think we're explosive. I think we're this and that. You're not, but that's what he felt like saying. And for him to come out and say he doesn't feel like Alvin's the running back he used to be, and then for Kendrick Miller to have success on Sunday, I think that might help DA's narrative of him saying, okay, I think we can move on from Alvin. The financials aren't easy, obviously. I don't think it's one of those moves that you want to make. I think you're better off keeping Alvin. But that's someone that I'm going to look at. I'm very curious to see what happens with him. I want to see number 41 go, but I wouldn't be shocked if the Saints decide that, hey, maybe it's time to move on from him.
What about Swiss Army Knife Taysom and recent first-round pick Penny?
Yeah, Penning I'm going to say no on. I just think that for the Saints, they might decide, hey, let's get a new offensive line coach in the building, which I think is going to happen. I just don't know how Doug Marrone keeps his job. So I think they might do that. And for Trevor Penning, it doesn't really make sense to get rid of him. I think right now, look, you're still just 2 years in. The first year was decimated by injuries. Now, do I think it's going to work? No. I think for them to pretty much say any offensive tackle but him is going to play this year, that's a bad sign. But I just don't think they'll get rid of him because I think right now he's still early in his rookie contract. You don't have to worry about it. I think that's a move. Maybe after next year, if he still doesn't play, you can get rid of him. As for Taysom Hill, I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence about it. Part of me thinks yes, but I think Taysom Hill's kind of bought into Dennis Allen, and I think those two get along well. And Taysom mentioned it. Like he said after the Falcons game, like that was a good game for Dennis Allen. Like it's a good thing for his stock and this and that. And I think that when you go back to the play where they score on Jamal Williams' touchdown, I'm not saying Taysom Hill was against that play, but he's one of the few guys that was not pumped up when the touchdown happened. And maybe that's just him not really caring as much and just going back to the sideline. But I feel like to some degree, DA would want to keep him. They got to work out the money, though. And if they can't work out the money, then I do think he will be gone. But I think if they could work out the money, that's someone that DA might want to keep.
Do you think bringing in John Gruden will be a threat to DA?
You know, it's in the long run, yes. In the immediate future, I think it's something that he probably feels is necessary. But I think for Gruden, if you're John Gruden, and I'm not saying I want the Saints to hire John Gruden, I want to make that clear. I think if you're John Gruden, though, you absolutely take whatever the Saints offer you because it might be the perfect way for him to weasel himself into another head coaching job. And I'm not advocating for that. I've been advocating for the Saints to get younger at head coach, more innovative at head coach, someone that kind of fits the culture and the city. But I think for Gruden, look, you go in. If the Saints offense starts struggling early, Pete Carmichael's probably out of there. You get a chance to work with Derek Carr, someone that he's had success with. And if Dennis Allen's not getting the job done and offensive players go, hey, we kind of like Gruden, who knows? Maybe he becomes the head coach. And I'm not saying I want that to happen, but there is a path to that happening. But for DA, he's got to look out for just winning right now. Like, that's the goal. It should have been playoffs or bust this year. It wasn't. I promise you next year will be playoffs or bust for the Saints. And I think for him, he's got to take risks. And this will be a huge one because, like you said, there is that threat of it. Like, there is that possibility that Gruden ends up taking his job. Like, I think there absolutely is the possibility of it. But I think he can't worry about that. He's got to do stuff that preserves his job right now. And, for him, there is that threat, but there also is that kind of fantasy land scenario in his head where he says, okay, I'm going to work on the defense. Maybe Gruden fixes the offense. We win 10, 11 games. I got my job for the next 2 years, and there's that preservation of it. So I think there's the risk, but there also is technically, although I don't think it will happen, I think there is that reward that he may weigh as well. So I think it's one that he'll probably have to take.
What young coaches that you have your eye on that you would like the Saints to, give a shot to?
Yeah, look, in terms of being an offensive coordinator, I don't know who that guy would be right now because I don't think anyone makes a lateral move that would end up getting blocked.
Well, I mean, being a head coach.
Oh, in terms of being a head coach, for me right now, obviously Ben Johnson's the one everyone talks about. One that I probably look at that I find really fascinating. I really like Bobby Slowick of the Texans. I think what he was able to do first year with C.J. Stroud, and obviously I give a ton of credit to Stroud, the maturity, the poise. The kid is, just an exceptional talent. I'm so glad he's not on the Panthers. I think Slowick's a guy that I look at. He's very intriguing. If he doesn't get hired this cycle, then next year's cycle, if DA gets fired, that's someone I'd be looking at for sure. I know obviously people love Ben Johnson, but he'll be as good as gone coming up here. Same goes for a guy like Harbaugh, who people are going to mention. So I think it's always kind of a revolving door. There's always kind of new coordinators that come to mind, and I'm sure that'll change very soon. But Bobby Slowick's probably the guy that I'm looking at because I'm not so certain he gets a job this year. And since I'm kind of thinking of 2025, which it sounds crazy to think about already from now, that'll probably be the guy that I'm looking at. And then maybe I can't remember I remember his last name, Smith. I believe it's Frank Smith of the Dolphins. Yeah. Their offense coordinator, that's someone that I'm also looking at as well because I think the Dolphins from just a X's and O's schematic standpoint, there's something there, and I think you can never go wrong from kind of picking someone from that Shanahan McDaniel coaching tree. It's definitely worth kind of picking those guys' brains.
Coming into the season, I wasn't too high on the pass rush, but besides that, I was feeling pretty good about the roster itself. Do you think it's fair to, for people to talk about the roster in hindsight, saying, well, this roster really is not all that good, or you really just think it's the coaches putting these guys in position. Because I've been saying all season, you swap staffs with the Lions, we will have their record and their playmakers, all their production. It will be the same as the playmakers on our team as far as production.
Well, I think offensive playmakers, I think the Saints are as good as I imagine them. I think Olave he keeps getting better. Rashid Shaheed keeps getting better. I loved what I saw from A.T. Perry from mid-November onward. I thought that he had a really nice, strong close to the season. Jawan was disappointing, but towards the end of the year picked it up, and I think with a better offensive staff together, he'll probably be able to pick up where he left off. Obviously, Taysom, you know what he brings. We know what Alvin brings. Before Mike got hurt, we know what he brings. So for me, I don't think the skill players is where the Saints maybe didn't meet the mark. I think they're as good as advertised. I think the cornerbacks are as good as advertised. The shocker for me was how bad they were in the trenches. I think that's something that I did not expect this year. I thought that the Saints would be okay on the defensive line. I did not expect Cam Jordan to fall off a cliff the way he did. I did not expect the defensive tackle signings to be a little underwhelming for most of the season. I thought Nathan Shepard and Colin Saunders, thought one of them would become like a really, really big name in the defensive tackle market. That just didn't happen. Now, Brian Brzee was excellent. Carl Granderson was excellent. But the rest of the line wasn't great for me. I thought Pete Werner took a step back, which was kind of upsetting to see. And then the offensive line, I thought towards the end of the year, pretty decent football. Beginning of the year, you're like, man, you got a first rounder at left tackle, a first rounder at left guard, a first rounder at right guard, a first rounder at right tackle. Why is this not looking better? So I think in the trenches, we probably did not realize how bad the Saints were going to be this year. The rest of the team kind of met everything I thought they would be. And then the one that I would say I did not expect to be as bad as it was the punting game. I did not expect it to be that awful with Lou Hedley. I thought it'd be average. It was way below average. Obviously, that's not great. You want to be able to flip the field. So did they meet my expectations as a whole? No. But I do still think there's talent here. It's just not maybe the high-end talent that we thought there'd be in the trenches.
Well, to clear your narrative, let's go ahead and talk about some positives, man. We got a lot of good young core players. One of which is Paulson Adebo, who is actually younger than Alontae Taylor. A lot of people think Alontae is younger than him because he came out after him, but he's going to have a lot of leverage. And we got a lot of young playmakers like A.T. Perry and Miller. Like, what are some positives that you could see going into 2024 season?
Yeah, I think, well, for starters, I'm looking at that wide receiver group. I think Olave is going to be a top 10 receiver next year. I just think that he's got that talent. When you give him the ball, you let him do his thing downfield, he's going to deliver. I think Rashid Shaheed is going to continue to ascend. I think it's more so of a play calling thing than it is a talent. I think for the Saints, sometimes they forget, man, we just got to dial up plays designed for him and let him do his thing. And when he does, he usually puts up big numbers. So I love what they got there. A.T. Perry, I think he could be an emerging talent. Kendre Miller is a huge positive, what he finished the year with. Now, it's all health related for him. I think if this kid stays healthy, you have your running back of the future. Now, it's a big if because, man, it was injury after injury this year. And I don't think you could just write that off because when the Saints drafted him, he was coming off an injury of his own. Obviously, he had the knee injury in his final year at TCU. So is he able to stay healthy? But if he is, I really like that aspect. I think for the secondary, look, if they lose Lattimore and they get rid of him, I think that is a huge blow to this team. But what I would like to see is if you put Alontae Taylor back outside, can he kind of pick up where he left off as a rookie? Because Alontae Taylor, he did not have a great year, but I also did not love the idea of throwing him into the slot. I thought that kind of hurt him. That's not where he's, built to thrive. So you have that young duo of Alontae and Adebo, even without Marshawn. I think that could be okay. Now, I don't want them to get rid of Marshawn, but that's still talent there. I think for the Saints, can you find a running mate across from Carl Granderson? If you can do that, I think that this defensive line can fix itself real soon. Because I think for Carl Granderson, I don't think he's this premier pass rusher. But if you can get someone that could be close to his equal and have those two guys on the ends with Brian Brzee getting better in the middle, I think that's how the Saints immediately fix that defensive line. If they could do that, that changes the defense. We saw this year, their most dominant games is usually when they're 8 up front. I think of the Patriots game. I think of the Giants game. Look at the Falcons game. When they start generating pressure, I think that'll be good for them. And then I think another thing is, too, I just mentioned Pete Werner, and he regressed. Can you get your young defensive talent to kind of step up? Pete Werner, Peyton Turner, these are guys that aren't necessarily dependable at the moment because of what just transpired this season, but there's still talent there, and I'd like to see how that goes. So I don't think this Saints team, the roster is in shambles. I do not believe that at all. But I do think they got to find a way to maximize the talent of certain guys on their team. And if they could do that, then I do think it could be a fun year. But there are some question marks there. But I look at the receiving core, and I look at the cornerback group. As long as they're talented there, they'll have the ability to contend on most Sundays.
Yeah, man. If we trade Marshawn, man, I just hope that Mickey just hangs up the phone immediately if Howie called, because he always get fleeced. But what are your at minimum requirements for Sean if trade dues go down?
Yeah, look, I think that 2 years ago you're asking for the world of a guy like this because he's so damn good, and you don't have the injuries that happened the last 2 years. Now, I don't think Marshawn Lattimore is necessarily damaged goods. I think the lacerated kidney last year, that is just a freaking fluke thing. Like, I don't expect that to ever happen to a player again. That's just bad luck. This year, look, he hurts the ankle. He misses a lot of time. How much time did he miss, though, because there was kind of tension in the building? I don't know. Maybe it's more than people thought, and maybe he could have came back sooner. If that's the case, it's not really that big of an injury. But knowing what we know in terms of him and DA not being on the same page, if the Saints get a second rounder for Marshawn Lattimore, I know a lot of fans will be like, Chris, that is not enough. Knowing the way the Saints have done business the last couple of years, I don't expect them to get maximum value for a player like him. So if they could get a top 50 pick, I would take it. I don't know if they could get that much. I mean, I know Jeff Duncan was hinting at it being a day 2 pick, leaning towards the later part of day 2, which if it's just a third rounder for Marshawn, man, that is depressing. But I'd say at minimum, if you could get a top 50 pick, that's kind of something that you can use to be a building block for your team. But either way, when you trade Marshawn Lattimore, you're going to lose that trade. You're going to spend money for him not to be on your roster. You're going to give up a cornerback that's still in the prime of his career. And you got to understand, if he's healthy, he's going to thrive for wherever he plays next, assuming that they're in a primarily man coverage defense. But either way, it's going to sting. I don't think there's a situation where I think you trade Marshawn and you get fair value. And I don't think there's a situation where you trade Marshawn and all the fans are like, all right, glad he's gone. I think we'll all pretty much be upset about it.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. What happens if we lose Kai Hartley and Jeff Ireland?
You know, I think for Jeff Ireland, it's going to be fascinating because I think for as many hits there's just as many misses. And I think the Saints could probably use a little bit of a reset in terms of their personnel department because I hate what they got going on with their prototype for defensive ends. I think this idea that they just keep drafting offensive linemen and switching their positions around, I don't love that idea. So they can use a couple of new brains in the building, new ideologies. So if they lose Ireland, I'm not saying it's a good thing, but I wouldn't say it's the end of the world. I think Kai Hartley would be a little tough because I think he's so innovative for the Saints when it comes to their cap manipulating moves and his ability to be one step ahead of people. So if you lose a mind like that, that's frustrating because the way I look at Mickey Loomis, and this might be considered a hot take, I don't necessarily think he's a great talent evaluator. So I think he's just really, really good when it comes to the books, which is something Harley's really good at when it comes to. And is there a way to kind of maybe let Loomis kind of slide into that presidential role? Because let's be real, he's not going anywhere anytime soon, no matter how bad fans may want him out, and kind of let Kai Hartley take on a bigger role in New Orleans so you don't end up losing him. I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if that's something they'll consider, but you do lose both of them. Then I think, I don't want to say you sound the alarms, but you got to start wondering, why are the ones that we think are good leaving the building and the ones that we're frustrated with staying? And that probably just builds more negativity. So I hope that doesn't happen, but we shall see for sure.
Yeah, man. I heard they even tried to draft Zach Bond in the first round. Like, they tried to trade up for him. Like, that is crazy to me. Like, they first round project theme is just it's just crazy to me. But they be hitting in the later rounds. That's why we have all this good young talent in this good core, because they hit in the later rounds and they could hit in undrafted players. So, you know, if they could just get away from that injured / project player in the first round and trade enough assets for him, I think we'll be fine. But I digress. But how do you think free agents will view coming to New Orleans in the state it's in now?
Yeah, look, I don't think it really changes as much. I know a lot of people might be like, hey, you know, with Dennis Allen, no, I think at the end of the day, guys will go to teams for two reasons. Schematic fit, financial reasons. Or the third one, and this isn't as much as people think it is, how much they believe their chances of winning. I think in the NFL, it's a little different as opposed to, let's say, the NBA or baseball, because, man, your career could end at a moment's notice, and all that money that might have been on the table is no longer guaranteed. So you got to kind of strike while the iron's hot. So I don't think the Saints, because they still have Dennis Allen, will lose on certain guys. I just don't see it that way because they don't have the financial resources that other teams right now in terms of cap flexibility and things of that nature. But I still think that they'll be able to kind of make some moves in terms of tweaking the O-line, tweaking the D-line, and being able to get guys that maybe fit their vision. I don't think they'll make any splash moves per se. I think the splashiest move they'll make in the last 2 years, whether people like it or not, was the Derek Carr contract. But I don't think guys see what happened this past Sunday or see what's going on in New Orleans go, there is no shot I'm playing for that guy, because it's still a contract. It's still an opportunity to prove yourself. And I don't think guys in the NFL will ever pass that up. I just don't think the Saints will be major players for different reasons, more so being they don't have the cap flexibility.
As far as the roster, the staff, and the draft, what's your perfect, realistic offseason moves?
Yeah, look, I think in terms of realistic, we got to cross quarterback off the board. And as much as I may want a young quarterback and as much as a lot of Saints fans may want one, I just don't think that's feasible for them right now, and that's in their picture. So things that I'm looking at, I think for starters, you got to fix this defensive line. You got to get another edge rusher in the building, whether it's via the draft. And if it is, stop going for the same prototype. The Marcus Davenport, Peyton Turner thing, it's just not working out for them. And you saw late in the year, guys like Bond, who are a little bit twitchier, got a little bit of that ability to bend around the edge. Maybe that's what you need across from Granderson. So I'd look at that, get better at the defensive line. I'd say bring in another young running back. And I'm not saying just to get, because they might get rid of Alvin. I think the problem is more so Jamal Williams doesn't have a lot of juice in his legs right now. And I don't think he's the type of back that can kind of give you that change of pace. So I'd bring in another young running back, which you can do later in the draft. I'm not so worried about that. For the Saints, maybe get another weapon in the passing game, because I expect them to lose Michael Thomas. And I think that although A.T. Perry showed promise, it doesn't hurt to get another guy in the building who may have potential or maybe a proven guy. Now, I'm not saying I want this guy, but let's be real. Hunter Renfrow probably will end up on the Saints, and we could go back and revisit this and be like, all right, here they go. They're becoming the Raiders, but that's probably a guy they'll look at. And now I'm not saying I'm fond of that move, but he won't cost a lot. I could live with that move. But I would say definitely helping the pass rush, figuring out the safety spot. I think that is a spot that is underratingly in need of help, especially in terms of getting younger and faster at that position. Another one to talk about, get another punter. I do not see how you go into this season with Lou Hedley. And that's probably, although not fun, a realistic plan for the Saints. It's not going to be sexy. It's not going to make us jump for joy, but it's one where you got to bring in another weapon, got to address your defensive line, got to fix in the trenches. Now, offensive line probably gets done via the draft, in my opinion, which good luck, because obviously what just happened when Penning didn't go their way, so you better make sure you hit this time around, and then tweak special teams a little bit for sure.
As at the moment, the 2024 schedule, we have, again, the second easiest schedule in the league. Do you think, by looking at the schedule, you think we still might be in the run-ins to get Shedeur Sanders?
I mean, we'll see how it goes. I think for the Saints, the reason I wouldn't worry too much about the draft stock at the moment for 2025 is, A, obviously the game's got to be played, but B, I think that if the Saints get to a point where they're like, hey, we need a franchise quarterback and we need to get one of these young guys, I don't think they would be afraid to be one of those teams that mortgages a lot of picks. And I don't know if it'll work. It could blow up in their face. You never know, because all those things obviously are so circumstantial and you got to let time kind of play out. But I don't think where they would be picking would stop them if they felt like it was the right move. I think in their heart of hearts, whether that's right or wrong, they feel like right now the best thing is to run it back. Now, I disagree with that thought, but I think if it doesn't work out this next season, 2024, I think they'll go, hey, you got to get a young quarterback. No matter what, we got to get better and younger on offense. And if they're picking 4, if they're picking 10, if they're picking 14, I don't think they'd be afraid to make a move. So I wouldn't really worry about that yet. But I will say the schedule is tough. And if the Saints aren't able to beat up on the bad teams and the mediocre teams on next year's schedule, then they're in trouble, because you obviously got to face the Browns. You got to face the Chiefs. You got to face the Chargers. You got to face the Rams again. You got to face the Eagles, the Cowboys, the Broncos. The Raiders could end up getting a new head coach. Maybe they bring in Harbaugh. Maybe they run it back with Pierce and they kind of carry over that momentum from last year. So schedule's going to be tough. If you can't handle those middle tier opponents, you're dead in the water anyway, and then we'll probably talk about a new quarterback, new coach combo. So I wouldn't worry about it. I think the Saints will be exactly where they need to be next year. If they're not winning those middle tier games, and if they are winning those middle tier games, then who knows? Maybe they get playoff football, and not all is forgiven, but Saints fans are a little bit more optimistic. But I wouldn't worry about the draft stock yet.
Last question before I let you go. Let's just talk about the division. I think this is the worst division, so it's no way but up. Like, I feel like our opponents, they're going to get better. The Falcons, they need a new head coach. They need a new quarterback. They seen what was going on. They made a change. Is it a guarantee for success? I don't know. But at the end of the day, they knew what they were doing wasn't a guarantee for success. So I would much rather try something and be on the upside of trying something than just stay in purgatory. So you got the Panthers. If they get an offensive coordinator, I think Bryce Young can figure it out. That just was one of the worst teams in the probably recent memory. So I just feel like they got no way to go but up. And the Bucks, they pretty much just ran it back, signed Baker Mayfield, seen something in him, got the offense right with the offensive coordinator. But I still don't think Todd Bowles is a good head coach. So I think they're going to be around the same number of wins next year. I think that's how we're going to be next year. We're going to bring in a new offensive coordinator, get everything right with Derek Carr a little bit, but at the same time, everything starts up top with Dennis Allen, and we're just going to be the 2023 Bucks. But I wanted to desperately lose these last few games because I felt like it's just detrimental to win these games. And now Atlanta, they beat us early in the season, which essentially kept us out the playoffs, and lost to us worse enough to fire their head coach, which a lot of fans were so happy about, and enough to keep our head coach. And now we just running it back, and now they're just going to try something new, and now they're just very excited. They could get Jaden Daniels. They could try it for Justin Fields. It just on the upside throughout the whole division to me, and we just stand pat. How do you feel about the division going forward?
Yeah, I think the Falcons are the X factor in the entire division. And I think obviously for Saints fans, it kind of makes you want to throw up. You don't want to hear that. But I think the way I look about it with the Panthers is I do agree with what you said about if they bring in like the right coach to fix Bryce Young, that's kind of all that matters for them in terms of the grand scheme of things. Because for the Panthers, it's about making sure your return on investment is good. So all that matters next season is if Bryce Young looks like a NFL starting quarterback. And if he doesn't, gosh, they're screwed for a long time. Like I'm talking 5 years, 6 years, whatever it may be. But if that looks good, who cares what the record is? They could only improve to, let's say, 5-12. But if Bryce Young looks good, that is the definition of an okay season for them. The Bucks are interesting. I think for them, I can't fully assess them until the offseason because I want to see, do they commit to Baker Mayfield? Do they commit to Devin White? Do they commit to Mike Evans? If they're willing to move on from all three, then I actually think the Bucks are smarter than people are giving them credit for. And realizing that, hey, just because we won this year the division does not mean that we're all of a sudden cracking the code and that we're on the ascension to being the next NFC powerhouse. I think you're winning just a really bad division right now, and you took advantage. Now, that doesn't mean you let all three walk, but you stick to your guns. And it's like, hey, Baker, I got 2 years, $60 million for you with an opt-out after one. Take it or leave it. Mike Evans, I'm not going over 3 years. Take it or leave it. Devin White, not going over this amount of years. Take it or leave it. So, for them, I can't fully assess them till I see what happens there. And I also want to add that if they lose their offensive coordinator and Dave Canales, that's going to change the way I view them because he's been the guy that's really changed a lot for them. I'd argue had the Saints hired a guy like that, who knows? Maybe they're in the playoffs this year, I think, because it would have been nice for them to do something different instead of your point of, and they just ran back the same exact thing from last year. And shocker, it pretty much looked the same with 2 more wins that, all right, your schedule kind of warranted it with the competition. So, for them, I don't know. The Falcons, I think they got a decent amount of talent. I think it comes down to, do you have the right head coach? Do you got the right quarterback? And I don't know if it's trading for Justin Fields. I don't know if it's trading, trying to acquire Russell Wilson, which I would stay far away from him. If I could get Justin Fields, I'd rather do that. If I could draft a quarterback, that would be my premier option if I were them. But
I hope they don't get Jaden Daniels.
I'm slightly worried about it, but I'm not as worried as people may think because I actually think when this draft process is all said and done, I think Jaden's going to go top 5. Like I know a lot of mock drafts might have him going that like 7 to 8 range right now. I think Jaden's probably going to blow a lot of people away, and I think people will say, can I turn him into a Lamar type of quarterback that can just wreck an opponent at the drop of the hat, off script, and who knows? Like maybe, and I'm not saying it's going to happen, but what's to say the draft order doesn't go Caleb, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, and Atlanta misses out? Obviously, that's wishful thinking, but that would be the guy if he goes to Atlanta with a guy like a Ben Johnson or someone of that nature. Then I'm a little bit worried. I'm like, okay, that makes the Falcons, in my mind, be the team that's on path to start owning the NFC South. But we'll have to see. I'm not really too worried about the Bucks at the moment because if they lose Canales, it hurts them. Panthers, I got to see what happens with them, and them not having the number 1 overall pick obviously hurts. But I'm looking at the Falcons. That's a team that I'm keeping a close eye on. For the Saints, their best bet, honestly, for the long run is just blowing it up after this next season. But who knows? Maybe they win the division and it prolongs the inevitable, which would sting, but it certainly is possible.
And see, that's why I wanted to lose out these last couple of games this time. Even at the expense of letting our rivals beat us, I'd rather that than get DA out of here because I'm past that rivalry stuff. Like, I don't want to be that fan who just stuck in purgatory and just had to run another year of misery back just to say, well, at least we beat the Falcons, at least we beat the Panthers. I am past that. I am far past that. The only veteran quarterback that we beat that started all year was Baker Mayfield. Everybody else was either benched multiple times, or a backup. Like that tells you everything you need to know. It's not rocket science. We had an easy schedule, and people making it out to be something else that is not, or is not an easy schedule. It's any given Sunday. It is an easy schedule because if it wasn't an easy schedule, you would have never been just so unhype about the Panthers beating the Bucks. You can't have it both ways. You can't say, oh, it's not an easy schedule, and then be like, the Panthers ain't beating the Bucks. So that's contradicting yourself right there. Now if we'd have beat a lot of these teams and beat them in dominant fashion, then I'd have been a little bit more enthusiastic about the next season. I'd have been a little bit more excited or whatever. But we didn't. We lost, and we lost in bad fashion, just like the 2022 Vikings. Everybody seen them go to the playoffs. Everybody knew they was going to lose because how they won a lot of them games, and they won double-digit games. So to me, fashion absolutely matters. But I'm going to go ahead on and let you get up out of here, Chris, man. Tell the people where they can follow you at, and, give them all your platforms for them to find you.
Yeah, so people can follow me on Twitter or X at Rosvoglou Report, ROSVOGLOU Report. They can check out the podcast, Straight Up Saints, where they put on Apple, Spotify. But really where we kind of been prioritizing things has been YouTube. So you just go to Boot Crew Media's YouTube page. You can find it under one of the tabs at Straight Up Saints. You can go through there or just go on Boot Crew Media's site at bootcrewmedia.com. And then the Instagram and TikTok, pretty straightforward. It's just Straight Up Saints for both of them.
All right, man. Keep the content coming, man. Appreciate you coming to the platform once again, man. And in the words of Dennis Allen, Saints legend, keep chopping wood and keep doing what you're doing, man. All right.